beginning chapter 4 this morning. If you'd like to turn there, my hope, Lord willing, is to cover the first 10 verses. Judges 4 and 5 cover the Deborah Barak thing, cycle, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, narrative, which I think most people are familiar with this to some extent or another. So 2 chapters, actually chapter 5 is an extended poem that sort of recounts the events and gives us additional information. It's kind of interesting. It's the only one of the Judges cycles that has that. If you like to place things chronologically, the battle here will be in about 1217 BC. That's preceded by 20 years of oppression by Jabin, the king of Hatzor, and his army commander Sisera. And it'll be followed by 40 years of peace. So that's, you could call that, I suppose, the peace of Deborah and Barak. It's always a struggle for me to know how quickly to push through this stuff because there's so much material, and maybe I should even ask you guys. Well, I'll save that question for a little bit. Let's just jump in here. Judges chapter 4, verse 1. Then the sons of Israel again did evil in the sight of Yahweh after Ehud died. Ehud, we covered last time we covered Shamgar, but he was somewhere in the piece that followed Ehud. They did evil in the sight of Yahweh, and this typically, if you go back in earlier descriptions, has to do with the worship of false gods. Now, there's other things I'm sure that were involved in that too. When you stray from worshiping the true God, you also typically begin to do things that are not according to his law, things that are immoral. This is a bull figurine discovered at a cult site in the hills of Samaria. It's about this big. And it's roughly the time that we're talking about here. The bull or calf figurine is often associated with Baal. We also have human-shaped Baal idols. And sometimes we have like the storm god Hadad standing on the back of a calf like this. But you associate this kind of figurine with other false worship in the Hebrew Bible, right? Mount Sinai, yeah. Aaron happens to pour some molten gold and it comes out as a calf, right? Another one? You know David, you know his son Solomon. After Solomon died, the kingdom split into 2 parts, Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Jeroboam, who was not a descendant of Solomon, took the northern 10 tribes, and he set up 2 golden calves, one at Dan, one at Bethel, and said, Israel, this is your God who brought you out of Egypt, a calf. And we know the Canaanites worshipped calf-like figurines like this, and of course the Egyptians did too, probably where the Israelites got that idea. They referred to their bull god as Apis, and this is a little pharaoh set kneeling down worshiping the Apis bull. Here's another figurine of Baal, and you see how he's got his arm up in the air. That's the smiting pose. So he's ready to whack somebody, right, with something. It could be a spear, it could be a mace, it could be a sword, something like that, but the god of war. You see that he's still got the gold foil on his head. Originally, he would have been completely covered in gold. So he would have looked like he was solid gold, more or less. So Israel began to be involved in this kind of stuff again. Disobedience, unfaithfulness, and that leads us to verse 2. Yahweh sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hatzor, and the commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth Hagoyim. Man, there's a lot of information in there. I love this phrase, Yahweh sold Israel into the hand. Well, it's not a nice phrase, but it's very evocative. This is a couple guys, fishermen, that have pulled in some catch off of the Sea of Galilee, early 1900s, and are selling it. Somebody would take it to a fish market. And it kind of pictures the fish are the Israelites. And God's like, how much? You want to buy these? And of course, Jabin's going to say yes. It's not the picture that you want of your country, the kingdom that you live in. People just kind of coming by and picking out what they want. God sold them into the hand of these foreigners. Jabin, the name of this guy. We have here a little bitty tablet. The corner that you're looking at is only about this big. And it was excavated at Hatzor. It's a little earlier than the time we're looking at. And it has the name Jabin on it. Seems like it was a dynastic name, a series of kings that all took the same name up here at Hatzor, probably even over centuries. So fascinating to have that name at that place, just a little bit earlier than the time of Deborah and Barak. This also comes from Hatzor. It's a little statue carved out of basalt. A little uncertain whether this is intended to be a god or one of the kings that ruled at Hatzor, but it's possible that it even depicts one of Jabin's ancestors, if it is intended to be this is the same thing, just a little different angle up there at Hatzor. I don't know. Hatzor is on your map, on your handout. I've got a number of cities highlighted with red that appear in this narrative, and Hatzor is the furthest one to the north. So if I go down far enough here, I will have a map too, and I can just show you. On the map I'm displaying here, it's the little green thumbtack north of the Sea of Galilee. So that's where Jabin is king. This is an aerial photo of of Hatzor. So you can see the ruins out here. These are Iron Age, so the time of the kings of Israel. Solomon had a chariot city up here. That's not the right word, a chariot city. He housed chariots up there, had stables and all this kind of stuff. It was a military outpost for him. But the actual the site is huge. It actually whoops, if I can do this right, goes out here. You can see the sides of the tell that were built up. It's massive. It is the largest ancient city in the entirety of ancient Israel. Just massive, massive. Mostly built during, the stuff that you see, the built up sides, they call it a glossy, a plastered slope that's intended to keep people from easily gaining access to the city wall. City wall would have been built on top of that. Would have taken just a ton of work to do. Oh, here I have a highlight for the lower and the upper city. Massive, massive city. Joshua had conquered this city roughly 2 centuries earlier and burned it, but the Israelites had not inhabited it. And archaeology bears that out too. We have Canaanite remains here until shortly after the time of Deborah and Barak. And then we have Israelite remains. Just some more photos because Hatzor is such a interesting place. Underneath this roof, which is modern, of course, is a palace that dates to the late Bronze Age and could very well be the palace that Jabin lived in. You're not going to see this unless I point it out. So it's got basalt base along here, and that goes on the inside too. And then they had walls, interior walls made of mud brick with orthostats, those basalt blocks underneath. And this place burned, probably at the hand of Deborah and Barak. And it got so hot that not only did it crack the basalt bases at the bottom of the wall, but it actually melted the mud brick. And you can see these mud bricks that are kind of sagged, and they're what do you call them, clinkers? They're clinky. You tap them with something, they almost sound like glass. They're so hard. Anyhow, that's not what I was going to show you. Instead, what I was going to show you was out front here is an altar. The side that's facing us is not well preserved, but you can kind of see the stones around on the other side. So there was a temple type structure in this vicinity as well. So that's Jabin, king of Hatzor. And then his commander was this guy named Sisera who lived at Harosheth Hagoyim. See, this wouldn't be hard to spend an entire lesson or two on, and I will come back to it a little bit too. There is a site. No, that's. Let me give you this one. There's a site down here called El Ahwat. So this is the Carmel mountain range. You can see in green here the Jezreel Valley. You can see Hatzor up here, and El Ahwat is down here. A guy by the name of Adam Zertal excavated this within the last couple decades, and it was a very strange place. I won't go into a ton of detail, I'll save that for later, but he began to try and locate some other city that looked even remotely similar, because this was not the typical Canaanite city. And he finally stumbled across one, not just one, a whole bunch of them. And they were located on the island of Sardinia, like the other side of Rome, Italy. And the more he investigated, the more similarities he found. What does that mean? Well, the easiest, most logical answer is people from Sardinia migrated across the Mediterranean and set up a city here and built it in the fashion that they were used to. And so I find the evidence that he gives pretty convincing. One of the things, well, let me just show you a couple of pictures. It's not a lot to look at. In part, they had trouble discovering it even because of all the brush on the mountainside here. And I mean, that's what you see when you go look at it today. It's not much to look at, but when you look at the plan of how it's laid out, all of a sudden it's like, that's really, really different than anything else you see around here. This is looking out toward to the west, toward the Mediterranean. So it's up on the hill. We have a notice here that he had, in verse 3, I guess I haven't read the verse yet. So I'll do that. The sons of Israel cried out to Yahweh, for he, and this would be Sisera, had 900 iron chariots, and he oppressed the sons of Israel severely for 20 years. I don't know what you think of when you think of iron chariots. What most people would think of is a chariot made out of iron. That would be like really heavy. And the technology to build something like that would be way beyond what anybody had at this time. I mean, if you think of building an iron chariot chassis, I mean, how many feet long would that have to be? Iron beam, and how do you do that without welding? And it would be very impractical because it's pulled by a couple horses, and the horses would be frothing after a couple hundred yards. So that conception is incorrect, that these were like entirely made of iron. What it means is it had iron parts on it. And iron was pretty new at this time. In fact, El Akhwat, the site we're looking at here, has probably the earliest iron smelting site in the entirety of ancient Israel. We're just at the beginning of what we call the Iron Age, about 1200 BC. Let me show you. This is a chariot that was pulled out of the tomb of King Tut in the Valley of Kings in Egypt. And you can tell it's pretty lightweight. This is a unique one, of course, because it's largely covered in gold foil, overlaid with gold, but it's almost entirely made of wood and wicker, very lightweight materials. These were quite fragile. They were very effective if you were on flat ground. A horse could really run, put a couple guys in there, an archer, a charioteer. But we have tons of, well, I think they pulled 3 or 4 chariots out of Tut's tomb. This is just one of them. And we have tons of other illustrations from this time period, and they all look relatively the same. So what's up with the iron, right? Well, it would have been iron parts. Where would you put iron parts if you had some iron that you wanted to use to make something like this sturdier? Where would you put your iron parts? Okay. The joints, I think I heard somebody say the tread, like around in fact, the pioneers used to do that. Very few iron parts on a covered wagon, but the wheel had an iron rim. Yeah, possibly the hubs. Give you a little closer view. Again, this is covered with gold, and so it doesn't quite look like, but here's one that's actually made out of wood, a little bit earlier than the time of Deborah and Barak. You can tell how precisely the woodwork and the joinery has been accomplished to make this a really, really well-balanced piece. To go back here, though, you notice, get my pointer out. Do you notice the top of a linchpin here? And then it goes down through that wooden axle. It keeps the wheel from sliding off. You can actually see that if you look right here as well. If I can get my pointer to work. It's right here. It goes through the axle, keeps the wheel from sliding off. They found one at El Akhwat. That's made of bronze, and all you're going to see here is the top of it, not the part that goes down. So there's some fascinating little indicators here at El Akhwat that may actually be Harosheth Hagoyim. By the way, Hagoyim, Ha is the, Goyim is nations or Gentiles. So Harosheth of the nations, Harosheth of the Gentiles, of the Goyim. This is a much earlier wheel from a chariot, but you can tell, and it's not iron, it's bronze, but you can see all the bronze parts around the outside here that would have really made this a much tougher type of wheel, would have lasted much better, would have stood up to wear. And this is about the time of Deborah and Barak too. This is Mycenaean Um, sorry, it's Cypriot. Comes from the island of Cyprus. But you can see a pair of horses and then a little, and I don't know, a four-spoked wheel. You saw that tuts were 6. That may just be symbolic and not actually representing what the chariot wheel looked like. You all know that chariots are effective on flat ground, and they're typically not effective in hill country or rocky country. And so these guys oppressed Israel with their chariots that had iron parts, which was new and cutting edge technologically. The Israelites cried out to Yahweh. This is standard in the Judges after oppression or as a result of oppression. It does kind of crack me up too, because this isn't funny, but here they are worshiping all these idols, these false non-gods that they make with their own hands. And then when times get really bad, who do they call out to? The true God. It's so typical of people. We have to suffer before we turn to the true God so often. I know that's not an absolute rule, but in fact, don't make it a rule. Turn to the true God before it gets really bad, which is what these guys should have done. But here they are, and they cry out to him. He oppressed Israel severely for 20 years. This is the longest oppression that we have. The Philistines, Ammonites at the end, that's kind of we wrap Saul into that too, kind of an ongoing sort of thing. But if you don't count the Ammonite Philistine oppression, which in some ways goes on for even longer, it goes into the king's period, this then would be the longest. And so we come to verse 4. Now Deborah, and in Hebrew it would be pronounced Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel at that time. She used to sit under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the sons of Israel came up to her for judgment. She sat under the palm tree of Deborah. There are not many palm trees in the hill country. There's palm trees down on the coast by Tel Aviv, Joppa. There's a ton of palm trees in the Dead Sea Valley, the Jordan Valley, Jericho, all that kind of stuff. In the hill country, you can grow apples, pomegranates, things like that. But there are a few, and that, I think, is what makes this remarkable. She wasn't living in a land of palms. It was a bit unusual that there would be a palm tree up in the hill country. Let me show you where that's at. Between Ramah and Bethel. And so you can see these two here. They're on the northern end of the central Benjamin Plateau, about halfway between Jerusalem and Shiloh. It's interesting that she is not associated with a particular city. She's not associated with the tabernacle, which isn't terribly far away. She's just out in the countryside under a palm tree. And that's where she ministered. Was that the whole question? Okay. What did you just want to know more about that? Why is she out there? It's a great question. It would be really interesting to know more. She is recognized as a prophetess. That seems quite clear. The Hebrew text here is woodenly Isha Naviah, a woman, a prophetess, which is basically what you had here. Deborah Hanaviah, Deborah, the prophetess. We do have other prophetesses in the Old Testament. Some of these you would probably think of. Others you may not. Can you name another prophetess? In the New Testament? Anna. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. There are some that are mentioned but not named. Isaiah has a wife who's a prophetess but not named. Isaiah 8:3 if you want to look it up.
When we see these Israel under oppression, are we speaking of a whole country from Dan to Beersheba, or is it more just a section of Israel? Because Jabin, I don't see how he could control the whole nation of Israel.
Yeah.
It's so huge from Dan to Beersheba.
Yeah.
So when we speak of these judges, they didn't rule the whole country. They ruled segments.
In particular areas. Yeah, no, I think you're right. Most of these oppressions are at least somewhat localized. They don't typically cover the entire country. It would be difficult to cover the entire country and not even profitable for whoever was oppressing. You take the major areas in your region, and I think we've seen that in some of our earlier judges too. Yeah, it's difficult to know how the exact extent of Jabin's oppression. It would be fascinating to know. Obviously, is it obvious that Deborah's area is not under oppression? She doesn't seem to be oppressed. She has to send for Barak. I don't know. Did you know Miriam is referred to as a prophetess? Yeah, okay. She's another one. She acts like one. Huldah? Familiar with after Huldah? That sounds familiar. There's a Noadiah in Nehemiah 6 that's a prophetess. Yeah. And Amy even told me I needed to just stop and address this. I thought about spending some time on this issue, and I'd be curious to gauge your interest. The whole, because in some ways it touches on or it sort of bleeds into women in ministry. Or I could just pass by this and just let it be. Dive into it. It wouldn't be hard to, and I have some things that would be, I think, on a Sunday morning. You guys are safe. Oh man. Well, I'll give that some thought and maybe come back to the question of what's the significance of Deborah the prophetess here. I could just say, I guess in passing, she is clearly not the deliverer. She's going to call the deliverer, but she is clearly not. And if you have any doubts about that, I think that can be proved quite easily. I'm not going to do it at the moment, but if you just read the text carefully, what is said about her, what is not said about her, what is said about Barak, I think that's quite clear. But I'm just gonna keep moving here because I need to. So she is technically in. That doesn't. Okay, well, you can see Shiloh on this map. So our two places, Ramah and Bethel, are just south of that. She is in Ephraim, close to the border of Benjamin. This is what that area looks like from the sky. A friend of mine took these photos from an airplane, and you can see what's there. There's a couple of sites that could be identified with Bethel here, and then Ramah right here. So this is the area that she's living in. This is on the ground. Okay. Well, see, this is another interesting one, verse 5. Most of your versions, I think, will have the Israelites came to her for judgment, which sounds like she's a civil judge. The Hebrew is more woodenly, they came to her for the judgment, has the definite article. What would the judgment be? Well, they cried out to God. God's going to provide a judgment, a solution, an answer. And it may very well be that that is the judgment that they came up to her for. I didn't invent that idea, by the way. Yeah. Well, I didn't see it when I read through it at first, but it's pretty clear in the Hebrew. Daniel Block, New American Commentary, gave me that idea, and the more I looked at it, the more I was like, yeah, he's right. In fact, he says that this does not indicate that she regularly presided over civil matters, as some English versions have it. The NIV gets so loose as to say they came to her to have their disputes decided. That sounds very much like civil court. And that does not sound very much like the Hebrew text there. NET is similar to that. Anyway, I'll let that one lie for the moment too, if you'll forgive me. So verse 6, she sent and summoned Barak the son of Abinoam from Kadesh Naphtali. And she said to him, behold, Yahweh the God of Israel has commanded, go and march to Mount Tabor, and take with you 10,000 men from the sons of Naphtali and from the sons of Zebulun. So I was just showing you this map. Okay, so you can see here the tribal boundaries of Naphtali. Maybe running low on battery. Comes down here. And then here is Zebulun. So these are the two places. And Kadesh is right here on the corner, the bottom corner of the Sea of Galilee. This one shows you Kadesh, but it does not show you the outline of the tribes. The route to get from her to Kadesh, about 70 miles. So she sent a messenger up there, and it probably took him a couple days to get there. And then he apparently comes back down and visits her under the palm tree. No, I didn't put them on that map, so that's fine. There are a couple other places identified that bear the name Kadesh, and this is that site. You can in fact see the corner of the Sea of Galilee off in the distance down in the valley, below sea level actually. And she tells him to gather the troops to Mount Tabor. And Tabor is kind of the lonely mountain that stands out in the Jezreel Valley. This is an early photo of it. You'll see some others here as we go. Amy and I actually drove up to the top of this thing when we were there. You can see the little switchback road and it was go 50 feet, turn, go 50 feet, turn, and then all of a sudden you got a tourist bus coming at you. Pull over to the side. But man, there's a little church up at the top, a monastery type thing, bunch of Catholics up there. But what a view, I tell you. It is way, way, way up in the air. And you can see up the Jezreel Valley for forever. Now, I think it's quite likely when they gather at Mount Tabor that they don't all climb to the top. There would be no point. Now, you probably have a lookout up there, a very winded lookout. But they would have gathered at the base somewhere around there. And so here you can see Mount Tabor, well, right there. And it's kind of at the corner of the Jezreel Valley, which is shaped a bit like an arrowhead pointing out toward the Mount Carmel range. It's not terribly far from where he was at Kadesh, and it's within the area here that is under discussion. So here you can see the entirety of that valley, Mount Tabor off in the background, and where the tribal boundaries would have run. So it's technically in the area of Issachar, although they didn't have stone markers where the boundary went. It was a little more nebulous than that. The hill of Moreh off to the right, which is real close to where the witch of Endor lived in Saul's day, but that's a different story. So she tells him to gather 10,000 men from these two tribes. In verse 7, Judges 4:7, I will draw out to you Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his many troops, to the river Kishon, and I will give him into your hand. Let's see here. I don't have the river marked. So here's Mount Tabor, where this battle is going to take place. Here's Kadesh on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. Here's El Ahwat, where I think the chariots are going to be coming from, going through the pass here near Megiddo, out onto the plain. The Kishon dumps out into the the Mediterranean Sea, comes through this, as you go upstream, comes through this narrow pass, and then comes out and crosses and runs up into the hills up in this area. Of course, it's got little feeder streams that go other places. Right along here is the watershed. So anything that falls to the east, rain that falls to the east, goes down into the Jordan Valley, but the rest of it goes west down the Kishon. Here the blue line marks the Kishon, and you can see Mount Tabor off in the distance faintly, and you can see about where Megiddo was and how these chariot forces would have come through there. We'll come back to more on the Kishon when we get into the actual battle. It's not a huge river. It used to be a lot of this area was marshy. The Israeli settlers drained it. I think it was in the late 1800s. And it's great agricultural land. It's very, very fertile. So verse 8, Barak said to her, if you go with me, I'll go. If you don't go with me, I won't go. Oh, hold my hand. There's a couple ways to look at this. It could come across as cowardice on his part. I think there's another possibility, and that's that he recognizes that she, as a prophetess, is a representative of God. I mean, that's what a prophet does, is communicates God's word to people. And therefore, in a real way, she represents God, or God's presence, if you will. Now, I don't want to go completely that direction, because what she says here in the next sentence is interesting too. Verse 9, she said, I will surely go with you, nevertheless. And I think this might be an indicator that his desire to have her along was not necessarily an act of faith. The honor shall not be yours on the journey you're about to take, for Yahweh will sell Sisera into the hands of a woman. Then Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh. What an enigmatic statement. If you didn't know the rest of the story, who might you think that woman would be? Deborah, yeah. Of course, it's a little bit veiled, and that gives a little wiggle room, and we know the rest of the story. And it wasn't Deborah that God sold her hand, Sisera into her hand. It was Jael. Yeah. Yeah, you're all saying, how do I say that name? Jael. Jael, Yael, Jael, whatever. Yes. Yes. The wife of Heber the Kenite. Interesting, though, that she is not the one into whose hand, Deborah is not the one into whose hand these people were delivered. Of course, as if we were reading this for the first time, we wouldn't know that. And we might think maybe she was referring to herself. And verse 10, I didn't show you my Bedouin woman with a sword representing Jael. Yeah. I don't think, okay, so I've seen other pictures from this same set. What she does with the sword is a sword dance. She's not out at the front of the Marines taking on the British, okay? But it was picturesque anyway. So what does he do then? Our 10th verse here. Barak called Zebulun and Naphtali together to Kadesh. It doesn't tell us how he did that. He probably sent out messengers. From great antiquity, a horn, a shofar, an animal horn, was a great way to call people together. They didn't have all of the noise pollution that we do. Airplanes coming into Ben Gurion Airport, or traffic going by on the highway, or construction equipment and jackhammers. So you could actually hear stuff like a shofar lighting up a couple miles away from a hilltop. You could hear that. So may very well have done that, blown the horn. And 10,000 men went up with him. And Deborah also went up with him. So, with Deborah at his side, Barak obeyed. The text doesn't mention this. Daniel Block thought, and I think he may be onto something, her presence with him may have been the thing that swayed people to come. From all we can tell, he's a nobody. I mean, he's probably got some skill. He's not just a lame beggar sitting in the city gate. But we don't have any indication that he had made a name for himself as a great military leader or anything like that. She did have a name. And I think it's probably a pretty good chance it's true that when people heard Deborah the prophetess is down at Kadesh, and her and Barak are calling the troops, that would have been impactful for them. Is that too much speculation? I'm sorry. It could be. He knew she would have some pull that he didn't. Yeah. Okay. A little bit of food for thought here. Each new generation makes its own way, and it's naturally a bad way. It's just human nature on display. We see that at the start of this section. They strayed. They abandoned worship of the true God, and yeah, we're going to do our own thing, and it wasn't a good thing. And that is so typical of us. We don't naturally follow in the footsteps of our forebears who have done well. That's kind of a standout when that does happen. Multi-generational faith is more of an exception, I think, than a rule. You can think of people where that's the case, but it doesn't come naturally to us. It takes work and effort and training, and even then it doesn't always work. If you're trying to train your kids, it's not just up to us as parents, but we do have a responsibility to train them in the way of the Lord. And I think you can see some failure here on that part. God faithfully responds when people cry out to him. We just see this again and again and again in the book of Judges. Yep, you messed up. Yep, you're sinful. Yeah, you do not deserve my grace. But you cry out to me? This is God speaking. You cry out to me, I will respond. He is just so gracious and faithful. It continues to impress me and amaze me. God's willingness to work with us when we come to him and ask for help and express our need and our desire to follow him even under duress. Yeah. Prodigal son. He's just waiting. And you kind of get that impression here with God too. He's just waiting. Yeah. Deliverance was not unilateral, but was contingent on the response of faith and obedience. Maybe too many big words. God didn't just say, okay, Jabin's gone, Sisera is gone, you guys can have a happy life. He could have. He has the power, but that's not how he did it. He talked to Deborah and told Deborah to talk to Barak and tell Barak that he needed to take some steps. And I do think this was contingent on that. If Barak had said, nah, I don't think so, would there have been deliverance? If he just turned and walked back to his town and done his own thing? I mean, not through him. Yeah.
In Scripture, doesn't God warn that people can get to a point where he doesn't hear them?
Yeah. Well, the ones I'm thinking of are specifically people who are in their sin. You may be thinking of something else, but yeah, he doesn't respond to people who do not, at least, how do I say this without misspeaking? He expects us to repent, to turn, forsake our sin, our evil way, when he responds to us. He doesn't just grant us goodness, deliverance, those kinds of things when we continue down a sinful path. Yeah, I have to look that up. Comments, questions? Okay, you've all been very patient. Let me close in a word of prayer. Lord, thanks for the book of Judges. We gain insight from reading how people act and how you interact with them. We know that you are faithful. You do not change. You are always the same. We can count also on your faithfulness to us. We also recognize it's important for us to be obedient to you and to be faithful to you. That is what you expect and require of us. You know as well as us, it doesn't come to us naturally. So we ask for your help. Pray that you would prod us when we need it, and that you would take care of us. We are in your hands, and we want to be found faithful to you, and we just ask for your help in that you would strengthen us and encourage us in those ways of goodness and righteousness, and use us as you see fit. In your name I pray. Amen.